Next.
Look. Thank you.
Hold on 1 minute, I have paperwork. Next, Lifton Green LLC, 270 Oxcaster Road.
For the applicant, John Bennett, Bruce Lifton is here, as is Mr. Pico, the property owner, who wants to say a few words. But let me take us up to where I think we should be. There were some comments made about site plan and elevations of the main house at the May 13th meeting, and as you're aware, there is no change proposed to the contributing structure that's located on the rear of the property, other than to move it to a more visible location. So what you're looking at, and this has been probably with you for at least 3 weeks, is a revised site plan. The board wanted to see a separate entrance for the... Yes?
Can I interrupt you for a moment?
Excuse me, sure.
So at our last meeting,
Yes.
our historic consultant came to the conclusion that what you're calling the accessory structure is actually an extant house that has been there. I believe Mr. Lifton is aware of that, is that correct?
Yes.
And so, that's the house. We
So
don't
what?
need two houses.
So what?
Well, okay, proceed.
That doesn't faze me in the least. You know?
Well, you only can have one house.
No, that's why we're before the Zoning Board of Appeals, because in the appropriate circumstance, the Board of Appeals, when the idea is to preserve in full the existing house, can allow the existing house to be changed to a guest house.
But moving the house is the purview of this board, and there's a concern that moving it makes it not really a preservation in full.
Well, I have a significant response to that. And, Zach said in his report, which not only will I legally respond to, but will have expert response to, Zach said in his report, he didn't say it couldn't be moved. And I'm going to tell you why it's not significant. And I'll get to that. But I did want to at first talk about, because at the first meeting, the only comments that were made about the site plan and the elevations to the main house, the proposed main house. So what we did do is
John, sorry, can you say that again? The comments were what?
on the site plan, Bo,
Okay.
because the attempt was...
Or
what I
site
think-
plan and moving of the house, right?
Yes, the moving the house, but as part of that, the board wanted to see if there could be a separate driveway for what is proposed to be the guest house and the main house, and also if we could shrink some of the parking. So that's what we've done, and that's shown on the revised site plan as of May 17th of 2019. If you compare it to the prior submission, the parking areas were combined, the driveways were one. So what we've done is we separated the parking and the entrance for the guest house, and the parking and the entrance for the main house. We're also, I think they're primarily Mr. Coburn's comments about the facade, the north elevation.
Oh, John, sorry, could you spin that around?
Sure,
Just to
sorry
show
about that.
it up? Thank you very much.
So this is a rendering, but the elevations are submitted also. There was a recessed area in the facade of the main house, so we took that recess away. Here's the facade of the main house. And this is the revision, correct?
Yes.
And there was a second stairway, and your concern was that made it looked like there were two front doors. So we took the stairways away, and we, in effect, pushed out the area of the northerly facade that had been indented. And those were the comments that were made to the main house, at least the ones that we were able to respond to. So that's for the board to consider. But what I want to talk about, and unless there are any questions about that, or we can talk about them later, what I do want the board to talk about to the board now is Zach's report about the moving of the house. I was very candid when we first came on, before this application to say that you have these two concepts of historic preservation, which you're struggling with here, and in order for this project to go forward, one of them has to fall away. So you have to weigh which is more important. And I was, to be honest with you, somewhat surprised about the concern about the moving of the house. The inventory sheet for this house states that the property, that the house is not visible from the road. Now, it's a historic structure. And also, nowhere in the inventory form does it talk about the location of the house as part of the reason for the designation. When do you want to preserve a house when the location, when its location is intrinsic to the historic significance of the house?
But
Please let me finish, Susan. I have
Fine.
a response to
Proceed.
Zach's, that's what I'm trying to do, okay? This is not a situation such as with the McCader Cooper Kendrick House, where it sits prominent on the hill near the library, and there was a request by the library to move the house further away from a public view. This is not a situation where the house is situated in, and this is critical, this house is not situated in a historic neighborhood that has not changed. The property Red Maples, if you read Zach's report, you'll be familiar with, which is to the east, totally redeveloped. As a matter of fact, the main house there was built in 2013. The property to the south, that odd barbell-shaped Grace property, has a small house on it, but that house has a certificate of appropriateness for demolition. So this is not, for example, a situation where you have a row of east side townhouses where if you took one of them out and moved them back or forth, you'd be upsetting some historic, intrinsically important historic location of the house. Nothing in the sheet is talked about its historic location as being historic. As a matter of fact, if you look at the blue sheet, it says it's not visible from the road. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to bring the house on the property forward and proud of the new proposed house so that it will indeed be visible to the public. We thought that that was a good thing. We thought that was a great thing. We think that's a thing that's much more significant than keeping it in a spot where the inventory sheet, which created it as a contributing structure, actually says that the house is not visible from the street. But really where you have to keep your eye on what's being proposed here, and what, as far as I'm concerned, under any reasonable and rational approach to this house wins the day, this project wins the day, is that we're suggesting that the house be moved forward and then not changed or altered at all. What's the big push and pull? The difficult thing that you guys deal with all the time is somebody comes in with a contributing structure. How are we going to add on to this and yet retain its historic significance? How are we going to add on to this and not create a situation where we're negating some of its status as a contributing structure? And what are we offering here? We're offering to preserve it in toto, not add on to it at all. I thought, surprisingly, I was surprised, I thought that that would be embraced by the board. How much time do you guys spend back and forth with additions to a contributing structure? That's probably the most tension that goes on between this board. What are we doing? We've all seen it. And we're not suggesting that here. We're suggesting, as the Zoning Board of Appeals has done in the past, to allow this house to remain with no additions, move it forward to a spot where it's visible. The sheet itself says it's not visible, not add on to it at all. So you don't have to go through that entire push and pull. If this was a house where the nomination itself was an intrinsic, this location itself was an intrinsic part of the blue sheet, it's not even mentioned in it. Not even mentioned in it. It says the house is not visible. We've submitted a letter today and obviously Zach will want to look at that, and as will you, where we've demonstrated that the mere moving of historic structure can actually be beneficial, and it doesn't decertify it. There's a Frank Lloyd Wright Pope Leahy house, which was moved, and the certification remained intact. And to the extent that there's any question about that, we'll stipulate that the movement, the change of location of this house will have no effect on its status as a contributing structure. We've given you some literature on the site on the issue, quoting from one of the pieces of literature. The overriding goal of preservation is to protect and provide for the continued use of historic building structures. In some circumstances, that goal can be accomplished by moving a building to a site where it may be better utilized. And we're suggesting that this is better for the public view shed. It moves it forward. You can see the house where you can't see it now, and it preserves the house without any additions. So we've given you some chapter and verse on that, and we've also noted that there is no this house as a contributing structure. We agree why that is a contributing structure because of its age and because of its method of construction and because of its aesthetic appeal. But nothing in that creation of it as a contributing structure has anything to do with the site location. Most of the time when you see people wanting to move historic structures, it's the concern is that there will damage be done because it will be moved away from the public view. That's not what's happening. That is not what's happening here. And moving in its own location, moving in a different location, as opposed to keeping it proud of the proposed main house, will further obscure this house, which already the contributing structure nomination sheet states is not visible from the road. So to me, this just makes this is a no-brainer to me. Absolutely. I don't see why this isn't fully embraced. And just because Zach says in his report, typically, the site is important, that doesn't mean that it is in every instance. That's really critical, particularly when you're going to preserve it and not with that whole push and pull of how to add on to it.
Wow.
So I think that's...
I couldn't disagree more, but
Well, if you're going to disagree, I would ask you to be specific.
I am going to be
with-
specific.
I would
You
ask you
won't
to be
let me
specific
speak.
with authority and reasons why.
You know, I'm going to say what I'm going to, excuse me, Mr. Bennett.
All I would do is ask you.
Excuse me.
I'm-
Excuse me. Do not tell me what I'm going to say.
But I would ask you to do so in a
Don't,
certain
I want
way.
you to be polite, state
I'm
the
being
facts, and
very
let's move
polite,
on.
Susan.
No.
Because I disagree with you doesn't mean
No,
that I'm
you
being
haven't
impolite.
allowed me to say a word. The fact is, this is a house. It's extant. It's in this, it can be seen. This idea that it's an invisible house, it's on the old maps. So I understand that you have an argument to make, but I don't go along with it. This is a house, people lived in it, it exists as an extant house, and have two houses on a property seems to me to be slightly against the zoning
Well,
code.
that's why, as I explained, that's why
Yes, it would be it would be so awful to add on to it. I don't know.
And that's why I explained that we're before the Zoning Board of Appeals to ask them to allow this 39 to 3,800 square foot house in an area which is improved with 10,000, 11,000, we put that information in there, 10,000, 11,000, 14,000 square foot houses, to be, instead of trying to bastardize it as was done on the Lloyd Smith's Gardner's house, 2 lots down, where that.
Well, you're presupposing that we would allow it.
Susan, you're interrupting me now. I'm just. trying to put my
I'm
point
allowed
in.
to speak, Mr. Bennett.
Of course you
Okay, so
are.
hear what I'm saying to you.
Okay.
You're presupposing that we would bastardize it, so continue. I don't agree.
Okay, well, that's what
No,
they make
you're
horse
just
races for, okay?
churning
And
it.
That's why they make judges, that's why they have horse
Yes.
races. In any event, so the thought would be.
You know, I'm going to
instead-
ask you to sit down if you continue to be flip.
What am I?
I'm not going to argue with you. You heard what I said.
Hey, I heard what you said. Okay, so let me continue my presentation.
You're before the ZBA now?
We're before the ZBA now.
Okay.
So what are we
But
doing?
The part of the application before the ZBA
is for your ability to just relocate it in its current,
Number one, to relocate it in its current position, and number two, as was done on Great Plains Road, one lot in from the intersection of Great Plains and Cooper's Neck, to allow what had become a main house to become a guest house, and the zoning board of appeals has authority to do that.
What does the ZBA have purview over the relocation?
Well, first of all, it would be, you'd be moving an accessory structure into the front yard, number one. And I think they're probably making a house, there's some dimensional relief that's necessary.
so they've identified,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
they've identified this or are classifying this as an accessory structure.
Well,
No, it is now the main house,
Correct.
but in addition to the dimensional relief that's required before the zoning board of appeals, in order to have, as you know, detached living quarters on one lot, you would need relief from the zoning board of appeals, which the zoning board of appeals in the historic district specifically, by specific section in the zoning code, has the authority to do. And they've done that in the past.
and are you representing it as an accessory structure to the ZBA?
No, I'm asking the zoning board
I'm
of appeals to
asking you a
check.
question. In your application to the ZBA, how do you categorize
I
the house?
characterize it as a house that was characterized in the blue sheet.
Okay, what I needed to know.
Characterized in the blue sheet, a
Fine.
sheet which formed the basis for this house's location as a contributing structure, was characterized as a carriage house. That's all I'm saying is what's in the record.
where,
Your board should be mindful of the fact that this is pending in front of the
That's why I'm
Board of
getting-
Appeals,
Yeah.
and it's
Asking
been referred to you under what section?
65
There's
dash.
a specific section. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is important. This is 11628K, and
oh,
you have
sure.
been referred, this has been referred to you under that section. You know, if this is a dispositive issue of this project. This isn't just an opinion of this board.
That's
This is, our law says the Board of Appeals refers this to you for the commentary of the board. You need to familiarize yourself with that statute and be aware of it and be aware of the responsibilities you've got to evaluate this. And this applicant isn't asking for your permission. This is coming from the Board of Appeals under our code. It's a big difference.
I don't disagree with any of that.
Right.
So,
Well, that's not mentioned in the materials that I've seen. Is there a letter in the file from the
yeah, there's a
zoning board? So first I've heard that this was referred to us by them under that part of the code. Is it in the file?
No, we made mention of that in correspondence. We specifically said we're here under that code section in
Yeah, but
correspondence.
we didn't get a memorandum from the ZBA as part of the referral and to review this?
I don't know offhand if it is, Rob. There should be just a formal reference, but
The zoning board of appeals application was also presented to this board.
But my question is, so, for instance, Zach's report, is that not given to the ZBA,
actually, it has been given to the ZBA.
that report?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we've been very clear about this entire process. When we went to the zoning board of appeals, we were aware of the fact that the village code section specifically requires a referral to this board. So when we filed the zoning board of appeals application, we said that, and we also have filed this board's application with the zoning board of appeals and vice versa.
So we can make recommendations to the ZBA, and actually kind of expands our jurisdiction. We can make recommendations pending certain suggestions.
It's not a question if you can.
You have the right to.
No, you
You
are
must.
obligated.
Okay.
That is your
Actually
charge.
gives, this
No,
is
you
the
must.
first time,
You can impose reasonable
Rob.
conditions or
like,
terms.
there's actually more responsibility of the board to even in purposes of site review, correct?
Yes.
It's interesting.
So, where are we? I'd like to point out a couple of things, because the neighbors to the south, unlike the other surrounding neighbors, have been somewhat critical of the application, which is strange, because at the first zoning board of appeals meeting, the husband, Mr. Grace, said that he would prefer the site plan because it would move the house further away from him, and he felt that it loomed over his house, number one. Number two, touching on something that I had mentioned before, the Grace property has a house on it now which has a certificate of appropriateness to demolish it. It probably was related at some point to this piece of property, but because that's not visible from the road and for some other reasons, despite the fact that the house is quite old, this board did issue a certificate to demolish it. So again, dovetailing on my position, which I think is quite clear, that the location of this house, there is no historic fabric which is intrinsic with the location of this house that's being destroyed, because the Red Maples parcel, as Zach noted, to the east has been totally developed, and the parcel to the south has a certificate of appropriateness to abandon it. So the proposed residence that we propose is compatible in terms of size. I thought it was interesting that one of the criticisms of the neighbor to the south was that the proposed new house was inappropriately large. We're in a zone where you don't add the size of the guest house to the GFA limitations. That's not required, but nevertheless, we have kept the combined GFA for the main house and the GFA, the proposed guest house, under the total GFA, even though it's not required in the area. And also, I thought it interesting that despite the Grace's concern about this house, the new main house being a large house, we did attach advertising materials prepared in connection with the sale of the Grace property, showing a proposed 10,000 square foot residence, which is 1,000 square feet less than what we're proposing. So I'd like, if I could, Mr. Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry, 1,000 square feet more, excuse me. The owner, Mr. Pico, is here. You'd like to just, if you could indulge him.
We're
I
having-
happen to have a copy of whatever correspondence you believe is in this file regarding this referral, because it doesn't exist currently in the file. And if this is something where we have specific requirements, in addition to other questions I have, I'm not prepared to move forward on it without understanding those instructions.
Well, that's fair.
It's not in this file. I have not seen it, and it bothers me when we are given files and a lot of time to review them, and information that's important to it are not in the file.
Give you whatever you need. You
I
should
have
have
other
that.
questions and concerns.
You should have that.
We should go through. We
No,
should.
you should
Well,
have
apparently,
that.
it's a threshold issue for us.
What's
So
the
it's-
threshold issue? I'm not doubting you. I'm just trying to.
Bo has said it's a bit of a threshold issue for us to understand the code under which this was referred to us from the ZBA. It's news to me that it was referred to us by the ZBA. There's nothing in the file describing that, so I'm not prepared to understand what my responsibilities are based on that referral.
I don't.
And it's not any of the correspondence that you have provided to us that's in the file, anyway.
This is our current correspondence.
No,
Our current correspondence specifically cites section 116, 28K.
what's the
Current
date?
correspondence, what's the date?
Oh, it's just today's, that's all.
Today's.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's been on our agenda for 2 months.
this is what happens.
No, it doesn't happen. I was here at the
Please, let's
last, at
just
the
move
last
on.
meeting when Mr.
You weren't here at the last
Well, the
meeting.
meeting before that, when Mr. Robinson specifically explained the fact that this is a referral from the Zoning Board of Appeals, because Bo was sitting in with the Zoning Board of Appeals when this matter was first heard as well, because Mr. Bruin was away. And I'm not trying to do anything other than give you whatever you need, Rob, to fulfill, you know, your function under the code. I just, it comes as a surprise to me that this, you know, that,
Well, there's some new, I mean, you know, there's a lot to launch into. When you're done with your presentation, we can, I think, I know I have some questions, and other
Okay.
people may have questions.
if you could indulge Mr. Pico, who's the owner for a while, I just wanted to say a few words to
Yeah,
the
hi,
board.
how are you? My name is Yves Pico, and my parents bought this house in 1978. We've been coming out here for over 40 years. And, originally, I think the inventory sheet that was done wasn't done until 1979. So it sort of feel like our hands are tied at this point. And we've enjoyed the house very much, and we like what's proposed, moving the house forward so people can see it clearly. I mean, the way it sits now, I believe, and I think my father, who passed away 5 years ago, said that the house in the back was what he thought was the original carriage house. So when everything was subdivided, our backyard is very small compared to the front yard. So we have this huge front yard, very small backyard. And in terms of redeveloping it, we need this house to be moved. I think originally it did have a bigger yard when the back property was included. Anyway, we like what we see in terms of the plans. It's a great house. We've enjoyed it very much. We feel that if it is moved and it has, a new foundation put in it, it's a house that can last for another 100 years, and we're happy to see that.
But you and your family
Yes,
lived there, and that was the main house that you lived in, correct?
correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The same way that the house where the zoning board of appeals on Great Plains Road allowed the conversion of that house from a main house to a guest house, that was the main house as well. And a copy of that decision has been submitted to you, and I'll get you another copy.
On the old maps,
Excuse me?
that house, Mr. Pico's house, has been there in that location since like 1898 or 19...
Bearing nothing to do with the determination that it's a contributing structure.
What do you mean?
But I don't think
Bearing
that's true
nothing
on-
to do with, it is a contributing
I'm not aware of
structure.
any inventory sheet that cites the specific site location as a factor for it being listed or designated as a contributing
Some
structure.
of them do the sheet on.
We're talking about this one.
No. You're asking for other ones. So I'll look for them. But the sheet on, for example, the Mercator Cooper Kendrick house, found that. The sheet on 88, which is what we think is a McKim Mead and White carriage house, next to the house that you're going to see after this, does that. I'll find some locations where that's a fair question. Let me dig into it and look for it.
We have a number of applications before us recently and right now
And the
that
timing's bad.
regard
This one, right.
moving houses. And while I see the quotation that you cited from Nancy Goblet's book, the general consensus is move as a last resort. That seems to be the general consensus in preservation, is that the original siting for historic preservationist matters. And so that's an issue that's before us now on several applications, including this one. So I think, and we've had some new information since we first heard on this application, having to do with a sort of confirmation that this house appears to have been in its original location. I'm mystified that it says it's not visible from the street, because it's visible now, so maybe the property was overgrown at the street. But it's very visible now. One can certainly see the house. And there are concerns, professional concerns, and Zach testified in one of the previous hearings on this or on another property, that moving it can in fact compromise it. I see that it can be moved, but there's, in some circumstances, she said, that goal can be accomplished by moving a building to a site where it may be better utilized, generate income, and be carefully maintained. But I'm not sure that any of those really pertain in this instance.
Well, but
I'm not sure the argument for moving it to begin with.
Well, in the other instance, if I may, and I hate to speak about another pending application, I think it's been adjourned for tonight. There's also a substantial addition prepared to that. You can't lose sight of the fact that this is the way to preserve the house without any addition.
But the citing wasn't based on I think we'd have the same citing discussion on that other application if there were not an addition to it. There was a concern generally with the concept of taking a historic asset in what is believed to be its original location and moving it for anything other than a reason of safety or impossibility to preserve it in its current location for some reason.
Let's look at why you consider making these things contributing structure. They possess special character or historic or aesthetic interest or value as part of the cultural, political, economic, or social history of the locality of the region. Let's assume, for the purposes of argument, that the architecture of this house qualifies for that. It's identified with historic personages. That's not the case, with all due respect to Mr. Pico's family. I don't know, maybe the family's more famous than I think. Embodies the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural style. That's fine. I'm not going to argue that, because one could make that argument. Work of a designer whose work has significantly influenced an age. I don't know the architect, but in any event, because of a unique location or singular physical characteristics represents an established feature of the neighborhood, because of a unique location or a singular physical characteristic. So you can't, yes, a goal, an often stated goal of preservation is preservation. I always butcher this Latin phrase, in situ, I think it is,
Yes,
on
in
site.
situ.
Okay, that is an often stated goal, but oftentimes what you're preserving, part of the characteristic is its location. And I would say that because the fact that the surrounding properties are not the way that they were when this house was created, Red Maples has been totally torn down, redeveloped. The other property, not Gordon, Grace property, you gave it, as you should have, a certificate of appropriateness to demolish that. So it doesn't bear any relation to any surrounding historic structures. And again, I think I was very candid. I think you have to weigh a little bit of competing goals in this one, and the fact that this would allow it to be preserved without, change it to a guest house, allow it to be preserved without additions.
What prevents it from being preserved in its current location? That's what I'm not understanding.
Well, even the zoning board of appeals members, and it's not their purview on this is more of your purview, have said, why would you put it behind a large house? If your concern is the site and the location of it, then
Original
since
site
it's
plan.
going to be redeveloped, the
original
property,
site plan.
why would you
Do we-
put
I
it
can't find-
behind
Do you have an original
a
site plan?
large house?
But could we just, your argument, Mr. Pico just got up and said that he and his family lived there happily as their house, which it is, for all these years, until now. So, that's not the original site plan. So what makes it inappropriate for it to remain the house on this property? And so you don't have a 10,000 square foot house in addition. I don't get this part.
No, that would be wholly arbitrary and capricious. You can't say that.
No, it's not. It is
No,
an
it would be.
existing, it's a
parcel.
fact.
It's a 3-acre parcel, and
So?
you can't tell somebody that they can only have a 3,900 square foot house on a 3-acre parcel.
saying that.
Well, that's what this
I'm
chairman just said.
asking,
You could-
he
That's
gets
what
up
you
and
said.
says that they had a wonderful time in this house. He-
Question
Yeah.
to the owner, was there
What?
any thought into, I mean, I know the application is to preserve, not increase, not add any addition to, and basically have it
You have an
singled
original
out
site
and have the
plan there?
family move into a more larger
The site
estate
plan
where
of the
this now
house as
becomes
it
a guest house.
stands today.
Was there any thought into doing an extension of the original house?
It's to add
Then you,
a neighborhood-appropriate addition to this house, I would challenge you, consistent with any of your other pronunciations in that circumstances, to say how it would be subservient to this house. How do you get there? And that's why I'm scratching my head, is we read the code, went to the zoning board of appeals, really trying to come up with some way to preserve this house without trying to impact the integrity of this house.
I remember at some point we were talking about it possibly being at I'm sorry, I don't have my distance, north, south, east, and west, so.
Okay, so this is south.
All right, so the southern portion of the lot further to, so the opposite side, I'm going to say, so if this is south, north, the southern eastern portion of the lot?
Southeastern portion of the lot, which is where the house is now.
Yes, so
Yes.
over there, keeping it in that location, maybe repositioning it in a more conforming manner, and then now that becomes a true accessory structure and guest house because it's subservient in the rear of the main house that you're trying to build. It's just
But then
maybe
you're putting it into one of the
well,
things.
it doesn't relocate anywhere from where it currently is. It
Yeah, but
currently
you're
stays.
also putting, as the zoning board of appeals recognized, and again, this is not their specific purview, but you're putting, as the zoning board of appeals recognized,
Here's an old map
you're
showing.
putting it in terms of, talk about changing the streetscape, but then you're putting it, this house, which is a contributing structure behind a large house. We're sort of scratching our head. This seemed like a
just
a
asking
good-
questions
a
as to
good
trying to come up-
solution to the problem. I mean, ultimately, you guys will have your opinions on it and everything, and I understand that, but I'm trying to convince you that I think overall this makes a good solution to the problem. Again, the other situation where you have a house being
So it's pretty
moved,
far back.
which I have my own personal opinion
It's there.
about driving by that house every day. I don't think that the move is a big deal, but in any event, but that's because there's practical reasons for it, not to make Mr. Martin's arguments, but there's an addition going on to that house.
Yeah, the
So I would just ask you, it's a little bit think out of the box-ish that we're
Yes, yeah.
It
suggesting.
becomes the
The zoning board of
Doesn't
appeals has the
need to.
power to help us with that. And in any event, you have Mr. Pico's, I'm going to ask you to adjourn it anyway,
states will.
because obviously that's what everyone's going to feel comfortable with. And I also have a historic consultant coming in to give you some comfort about the fact that this is actually a preferred method of going about it in these circumstances.
What's going to happen to this house on 3 acres?
I-
Either it's going to
Well,
get built.
part of my
What do you think?
response is, I can't speak to what's been approved around it and how the neighborhood has
Yes,
changed.
there's some-
We're charged with protecting historic properties in the
Understand.
historic district, contributing structures in the historic district. When they exist in an apparently original form, that's a really good place for us to start. And I would be more comfortable considering, as we've done on several occasions and approved on several occasions, an appropriate addition to that house in its
A
existing location.
9,000 square foot addition to this house.
What,
If it's architecturally appropriate.
How do you get there without making it
Not an
not
architect.
subserv? No, but
what are the, where are you?
what's that suggests is what was done to the Lloyd Smith house, where it became a wing of a house.
Which a lot of
we
people
thought-
don't like, and I'm not going to say whether they're
Yeah,
right or
yeah.
wrong, and I wasn't on the board then.
Okay.
But part of this then says that maybe in some cases, a 9,000 square foot addition doesn't work, even though the zoning says it's possible.
Right.
No, but-
Maybe it
Oh.
doesn't work on an appropriateness level.
Okay, then let's go
for
back.
property.
Then let's go back to the standard, because we might as well get to this. What's the standard? The standard is the size of the addition and the size of the structure in relation to the lot. This is a 3-acre lot, okay? The size of the addition, because I'm taking it right out of the current litigation, in relation to the adjacent parcels, the adjacent properties. That's why we put these 10,000, 14,000 square foot houses in the record. And then in relation to the neighborhood, if you drive down Ox Pasture,
Right.
but they're all big houses.
They
So I
are.
think it'd probably be, and again,
What that creates is a situation where this house provides, maybe unfairly so, and maybe based on decisions that would be rethought today, but it provides a situation where this property in its current form provides some visual relief and a sort of reality check and reminder of what that area of the town looked like, not originally, because it was farmland, it was pasture land, but at some point 50 and 100
Yeah.
years ago.
and I can't intellectually argue with you as to whether or not that would be a laudable goal, but what I can tell you is that based upon your jurisdiction and the sort of what you have to put this through in the code, i.e. the size of the property, the adjacent improvements, and the improvements in the neighborhood, that an attempt to that would be, I respectfully believe, be inappropriate.
Can you show
but-
us actually the exact, is it a 3-acre lot?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have any documentation that actually shows.
They have a survey.
We have a survey.
The survey has the
Looking
square
all over
footage on
it.
it.
117,000 square feet,
Yeah.
so
Which is
it's
17.5.
just under 3
So it's just
acres.
shy of 3 builders
2.85
acres,
or
my
something.
apologies, just shy of 3
Thank you.
builders acre.
2.85?
Yes.
Around there, yeah.
Mhm.
It's-
2.698,
it-
2.7 exactly.
Thank you, Rob.
It's not an easy one, but we think we've come up with a better solution here.
Right, do you have anything more to add, Mr. Bennett?
Other than to ask for an adjournment, no.
What?
Other than to ask, as I had previously stated, for an adjournment, no.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address this application at this time? So are you asking for an adjournment to when?
When's the next meeting? The next meeting?
July 8th?
Yep.
Motion to approve applicant's request to adjourn to our next meeting, July 8th, 2019.
So moved?
Second.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye. 4 ayes. Next, 72 Gin Lane LLC, construct two-story single-family dwelling and demolish existing dwelling.
It's for the applicant, John Bennett and Reed. Tim Haynes, the project architect here, is the applicant seeking approval from this board to demolish the existing residence at 72 Gin Lane, which, by the way, was constructed in 2003, so there's no historic import here, and build a two-story house. So I'd ask Mr. Hayes to come up and discuss the proposed new construction, which will be essentially on the footprint of the existing house.
What? Yeah, five.
Photos of the existing house.
So this is 72, of course, to that large house at 56. This is, it's the house, it's rather close to the ocean.
Okay, so you originally said you were keeping this and now you're not?
No,
No, it's a separate lot, so.
I
Separate
know
lot.
it is.
And by the way, I'm not suggesting that this gave any imprimatur to the proposed new house, but the landscape plan that was, for both parcels, was previously approved.
This is cute. I don't mind this. Go ahead. Did you say your name, Mr. Haynes?
Tim Haynes, architect.
Thank you.
It's a separate parcel. We're showing the overall site plan because it's being conceived of by the client as one compound, as it were. Tell me if I'm telling you things that you already.
We,
56, Susan, right here?
56 is the big
we have
house.
we have this.
That's an overall site plan for both combined lots.
You already have
You've already
that.
approved that.
Yeah, I know we did.
Yeah.
Arnie, whatever.
Yeah,
Arnie Maynard.
Yeah, Mr. Maynard. But what you have down there,
Same site plan that you have in
oh,
miniature
but
in
there,
front of
where's the
you.
one with the
Here's-
buildings?
The building.
Yeah, the what's called the pool house.
It's number 72.
It's actually
Is 72?
single-family residence.
Okay, got it. It's just
Yeah,
not
they call it,
exactly elaborate.
Arnie calls it a pool house.
Because I had a pool house.
Yeah, I think that actually that would be smart not to call that the pool
Yeah,
house.
now, I call it the ocean cottage.
That's
but-
correct,
Yeah,
because pool houses can't be
yeah,
that
yeah,
big.
yeah, exactly.
You might want to
It's-
relabel that
yeah,
sometime if you get,
exactly.
if you ever have to redo it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Here.
So what you're seeing on 72, essentially, we'll get to the architecture of it, is what exists. There is the tennis court that exists. There are some tennis pavilion houses right beside the tennis court. They exist and are being restored. The tennis court is being restored. There's a swimming pool, oval swimming pool on the ocean, which is being repaired and restored. And there is an ocean cottage where it says pool house.
Yep.
And that is a house that is currently non-FEMA compliant because it has an occupied basement with rooms and kitchen and bedrooms and subterranean. CO.
Wow.
And so what we are proposing is using the footprint, actually a little bit less of the footprint, but that's just because of the architecture, really. It's not any great gesture.
We're taking off that little east.
All of
Yeah,
this
there's, yes,
Build up.
build up. It has to
It's way up there.
get a choice.
It's the FEMA land.
Yeah, it's
So how
FEMA
tall
land.
is this thing? It's,
It becomes,
well, is,
Six, 8.
was it added up anywhere, these tiny little numbers?
28 foot 4 inches.
roof is at 49 feet.
Wow.
Above mean high tide.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, sea level.
Right. Because, yeah,
Because of the.
we're
feet.
starting at first floor at almost
Yeah, yeah,
21
yeah.
feet. So,
I think we heard this before
yeah,
somewhere down the
yeah,
road.
you know, I'm not going to
I
belabor
think that
that.
was your project, wasn't it? Yeah.
Maybe.
That's no, there's no option.
No,
to
I'm
that,
not. I'm not the bad one.
There's no option on that, though.
No.
Right. So,
Well, you could make a smaller house there, but that's okay.
It's a very small house, given it's a 3-acre parcel. It's
Yeah,
a
it
tiny
just
house.
sits up there.
right. So the house that we are proposing has a 1,420 square foot first floor and a 936 square foot second floor, for a total proposed of 2,356, which is smaller than what's there if you take the 2 floors that exist. And what we did is,
But the height of what's there is nothing like this.
this is going to be about 10 or 11 feet taller, I believe, if my memory is correct. But
Sounds about right.
Well, that's the FEMA, I mean,
Well, yeah, we're in a
Yeah.
VE 17,
that's what that
and
strip
2
is.
feet of
Nearby
freeboard.
the other project.
And then you
And this is
host-
an overlay of our footprint over what's
Okay.
existing there now. So let's, if you bear with me, I'm going to zip to the architecture aspect of it. So as you know, we have a big main house that sort of is a cacophony of history
Semi-Georgian.
that has been overlaid and done. So we started thinking about this house, like we wanted it to take elements from that, but we weren't looking to create a mini-me. What's there now, built in 2003, whether you like it or not, is furthering that sort of cacophony of arched window here, eyebrow window here, jigs and jags, lots of railings of different types, lots of cornices and corbelling, and it's very active. So we wanted to have a moment of sort of a pure volume, symmetry, and a simpler approach to sort of the house that's out on the beach. We loved the big stairs that take you in and out of the main house, so we wanted that to become part of this house. We
Like sort of porch conceits on the ends.
Yes, I mean, I don't know if I have renderings, but just to look at it in line drawing, you have all of this. We didn't want massive amounts of glass, so we kept with double hung windows with shutters. We filled in on the ends the way the main house had been with some sort of conservatory type additions. So those form part of the ground story wings, as it were. But both facing the ocean and facing the main house, we kept to same proportions of sort of double hung windows that are in the main house, same shutters that are on the main house, and in areas up above where we had rooms where we didn't want any more glass, we pretended the shutters were closed and they became like shuttered sleeping porches, but they're internal. It's an internal space. The whole thing sits on a whitewashed brick foundation, same way that the main house does with the arches, and then above that is a shingled house. The thought when we produced these drawings was the shingles would be white, painted shingles like the house. The trim would be white and the windows would be white. The shutters would be the dark green black that were on the main house and we started with the concept of, and it's called out on these drawings, to be a slate roof to match the main house. I don't think a slate roof is appropriate on a beach cottage. I think that should become a wood cedar shingled roof. So I've that's been an epiphany that, and I ran it by the client, and they 100% agree. We also have been discussing, and we wanted sort of feedback on whether the house should be a white shingle house or whether it should be a natural shingle house out on the beach, because it is on the dune, and it might be a little bit,
And isn't there a shingle thing when you first come in there?
yes, there's there's the barn, exactly, and our feeling is a more natural treatment
agree.
of the house would be more commensurate with it being
Well, I'd like it
in
to
the dunes.
disappear more.
And the
but
columns would be painted white.
that's
Columns
fine.
would be painted
So it'd
white.
just be, Southampton shingles and white paint.
Yeah, it would just be.
I'm not saying just. It would
No,
be-
that's it, and also, it can take its language from the main house, but we really do want to make it less grand.
Well, I
So
don't think
I
you'll
hate
have a
to do this
problem
to
there.
you,
Goodness.
but my drawings, those are the changes we'd like to
Okay.
make, and that has
Can you
occurred since we
notate
put the
that?
drawings in.
Question,
So it would be a change in the materials, is that
Change,
correct?
same, yeah.
No, It's
It's
not a
not
change in.
It would
the
be
structure.
shingled house, but a natural red cedar shingle house, and it wouldn't be a slate roof, it would be a red
So-
cedar.
I don't know where this is on these, is that written
Not
on these
there, so
plans?
It'll be on the larger plans.
on a
Uh-huh,
larger set.
so you could write,
I could.
since you are the architect, I believe you can write on the
And these are
plans.
small, I know you have copies of them, but these are the originals, so that it just gives you, I don't know, I think they're prettier.
Oh, they're very
small
pretty.
And it's original. So this being the view from street
Driveway.
side, as it were, the drive-in, and this being
On the beach.
from the beach. I had them render the house white, because again, this was done
Uh-huh, I think it
several weeks
would be
ago.
less intrusive if it were not white.
Exactly, that's what we think.
And like, there's, I don't know where Alan has that, something up there, does he still have that?
Oh,
To the east?
Yeah.
That's also shingled, that's not white. He has a shingled house with white trim. It's like a hot tub and the thing, is that still up there? I don't know, it's on the
there,
same,
yeah. The other house that's way out, right, what's the house right next door to the west that's out there? It's painted
white,
white and yellow, sort of, and
okay.
it just feels better to me in the dunes, and I'm sorry I didn't have this
Give them
thought
the original
when
plans
these
if
were
you
put
want.
in a long time ago, but I was saying to the client, I just think it's much better, and all of a sudden, the bell went off for them, and they said, absolutely, as much as you can naturalize it, the better.
Rob, are those, do you have two sets of original plans there?
I'll see. Just
Yes, I
for.
know you're looking at it, but when
I'm
you're
looking at
finished.
it, I know. Just for reference, on this small set, the elevation directions have actually been changed. They appear correct on the large set, but on the small set, west is east and north is south.
Oh, great.
Where does he even see this?
But there's one set of the original, Susan, not stamped in yet. but-
It's not stamped in?
Well, here's a set that is stamped in. Let's see if there's an elevation in it. This
It should
doesn't
be
include
stamped in.
elevations.
Did they just bring those, or that was in the building department, right?
Oh, you know what? Must have been part of this whole set, which was stamped in, but it's not stapled. This is.
But are there
that's-
two sets of the plans of this house?
Calling it full house.
That's-
Stamped in?
There's one set.
Oh, I see.
And is there a second full-size set stamped in? No. No,
No?
not full-size.
Well, if
I
we
don't
could
see a
find them, we
second
could stamp
full-size.
them.
I think they have a set.
Do you have a set?
One
We have an
signature.
extra set.
Okay.
We're gonna,
I did also have one quick question,
Yep.
Tim. On what is, I think, the east elevation here,
Yeah, should I get a big one? Yeah, okay.
it looks like this ridge line on the porch is going up above the main ridge line, but that condition doesn't show on other
we
elevations.
have a roof.
Are you seeing that?
Yeah, it can't.
That's what I thought.
Here, does this help you, Rob?
No, it's symmetrical, yes, I don't know,
That's not meant to be.
no, and I don't know why.
Because the angle's going to be it's the same.
It's dead on, the symmetry is exactly, nothing's higher than anything else.
So,
It's-
and you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, that is symmetrical, is it not?
there's the roof,
Yeah.
yeah.
But to have the same roof angle, what's going on there? Is the rendering, does it show that porch too wide? Or what's making that roof line too tall?
Well, there's something odd with that. You're absolutely right.
Because you can't see it on the other side, it's behind the chimney, but rough calculations says
Well,
they would
actually,
meet
according to
the-
this roof plan, if you ask me, then this should be,
Oh, yeah,
this ridge
It's the top.
is higher
is actually higher. The east-west ridge is higher.
than these,
East-west ridge, yeah.
which is the opposite of,
Well, that's showing the west, or the east elevation is showing higher, but on the west side, it's
Yeah.
behind the chimney. Is that right? Yeah, it's behind the chimney, but it looks like it would meet at about the ridge line. No, it would go up above. Okay. So do we,
actually, the long, right, so the reality is these should be lower on
Yeah.
the two sides.
yeah, the north and south gables should be
Yeah,
a foot
this
and a
is-
half or so
yeah.
lower.
So we'll fix that.
Okay. I don't have any problems with the architecture. I think it looks great. And I think the weathered shingle, I agree with Susan.
Yeah, it should
Weathered
blend into the,
shingles
because it
and the
stands up
shingle
really
roof.
high and it's close, they got in that location that they
Mhm.
might not have been having otherwise.
I think it's.
Right, and that's that's what they're trading.
I get it,
is
yep.
Not a big house on the land, but a small one using the
You
footprint.
only have one set.
So where are we, board?
Well,
You might have,
I did get a call today from an attorney for one of the neighbors who said the neighbor was going to object based upon a covenant that's on the property. So,
Really?
yeah, so what we have here, let me hand you, and I
so
already
are we
gave.
objecting for our own design?
I don't know what covenants are wacky.
No, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I didn't hear any design objections.
You did not hear any design
Okay.
objections. And in fact, the change from the white
I
was.
believe someone standing up
very-
behind you is
oh,
probably
Okay,
the
sir.
attorney.
but I'm not finished with my,
Mr. Bennett's
I'm
not
not
done, I'll wait till-
finished with my
Okay.
presentation.
Are you, there is an attorney here for the person
I
who's
understand.
got the covenant
but
problem.
What I'm about to tell you is quite germane to,
You need to give Bo one of these, don't we?
I gave him one.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
So in,
I'm going to sit for a moment.
How many where should we skip to in the covenant?
well,
Anywhere?
really, this letter that was a letter from me to John Foster was then countersigned by Mr. Foster back in August of 2016, tells the whole story. Back in 1989, an application was made to the Zoning Board of Appeals to construct a second-story addition onto the house that was there at the time, which wasn't even the existing house. And the Zoning Board of Appeals denied that application. The property owner brought a lawsuit in Supreme Court, Suffolk County, and the Supreme Court directed the Zoning Board of Appeals to grant the application to
For
allow
a
the
house
second
that's
story.
not there, a big house?
There was a house there that was a one-story house. In 1989,
Oh, 89, right.
the owner, the then owner, was before Browse, it was Belfer? No, it was Browse, it was probably written Browse, because Belfer sold it to our client. But brought an application to the Zoning Board of Appeals to take the then house that was there and add a second story to it. The ZBA denied the application. The owner sued. The Supreme Court, Suffolk County, directed the Zoning Board of Appeals to grant the application to add the second story. And the appellate division, because the village appealed that decision, the appellate division affirmed, saying, yes, this Zoning Board of Appeals has to grant that variance, so they did.
In the meantime, the planning board incorporated the zoning board ruling into a subdivision covenant.
Yeah, exactly, so, but then the I'm sorry, so the house was, yes, and there was a covenant that was created. And then there was the house that was demolished on the property. After that, there was only a one-story house built with a basement, a fully finished basement, which is there now, and it has a CO. So we specifically, the way I read all these documents, including the amended covenant, which is attached and states quite clearly, there shall be no expansion of the building ground area coverage
Right.
unless you move the thing back to 100 feet, which is not what we're talking about. We're staying within that ground area coverage. Okay, I read the case, I read the documentation, I read the amended covenant, and I went to John Foster and I said, John, please confirm, based upon all these things, that it's your opinion that a new two-story residence in the same footprint as the existing residence could be constructed. And Mr. Foster agreed.
With a smaller second floor.
With indeed a smaller second floor. He didn't say that, but we're actually not taking full advantage of this.
But the covenant is for the ground coverage, the thing that sits on the ground,
That's right, and we're not expanding that.
not the,
No, the second story, the
Right.
appellate division
But-
said, shame on you to the zoning board of
Yeah, for
appeals.
doing that.
You should have let that variance, you should have granted that
And
variance.
neither the Supreme Court nor the appellate court addressed the issue of the planning board having incorporated they didn't
No,
direct them to clarify the covenant.
As a
in any way.
result of litigation, the covenant had to be amended to allow what we're doing now.
So the covenant has been amended.
Yes,
where is that?
that's the, you're seeing the modification to the declaration, which is the next, which is referenced in
Oh,
Mr.
pass
Foster's
this
letter.
letter, all
This is
signed.
modification to declaration,
What date are we on?
1993.
1993.
The fourth page then.
I got a
Fourth page, the
1999.
second page and the third page.
Oh, okay.
The thing at the very end is Gil Flanagan's prior request for Mr. Foster to confirm that, that these approvals were still alive, which is what we also did back in 2016. Now, so you have the zoning board of appeals saying that we can, denying the request to essentially do something similar, and not only the Supreme Court, but the appellate division saying they shouldn't have done that, you have the right to do that. Then we have a modification of the covenant, then we have a letter from John Foster confirming that we can do what we want to do here today, and then we have a neighbor objecting to a covenant, but that neighbor, since the neighbor is not part of the subdivision, and then was part of the chain of the title.
So do I understand, because in the modification, I see that it actually mentions no new structure or any disposable facility or expansion of existing buildings shall be constructed or otherwise located on 100 feet from the top of the dune. And that was amended to say...
This restriction shall not be construed as prohibiting the building of a second floor on the existing one-story residence on Lot 3, provided a covenant is put on the subdivision that there shall be no expansion of the building ground area, coverage or footprint, and if an expansion of the building's ground area is proposed, the building should be moved back 100 feet. And so we're not proposing
Where,
that.
I'm just skimming this, but one part is a restoration as opposed to a new. Is that
No,
true?
that's why Mr. Foster, but if you read the covenant says there should be no expansion
expansion
of the
above
ground area
area.
coverage.
Right, but now I'm on,
Footprint.
now I'm in the,
Number one. And number two, Mr. Foster confirmed that a second two-story building could be placed on the property as per the prior
as the
approvals,
covenant.
as per the covenant and as per the zoning. And number three, from a pure health, safety, and welfare point of view, you shouldn't want to construe it any other way because that's how you achieve the FEMA height requirements, by the construction of a brand-new covenant, of a brand-new structure that complies with FEMA. Now, the other thing that's important for the board to realize, and this is beyond the purview of the board, but it's important that the board do realize that there are only 3 lots on this subdivision, and this is the 3rd lot. The neighbor, from what I've been able to understand, Mr. Shumway, lives on a lot that, to the east that was never part of this subdivision. He's not in the chain of title to this covenant, so he simply has no right whatsoever to even mention the covenant because he has no enforcement. He has no right to seek an enforcement of this covenant, even if the covenant were construed to be negative to contrary to what I'm saying. So he simply can't raise the covenant. But I'll leave that to your counsel for that.
So I have a
Raise the question, he just can't, he doesn't have, he can raise the question. And that's-
He's the neighbor. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, he can raise a question, but he can't, he has no enforcement right, and I would suggest that he has no right to raise the covenant. He can raise a question about the architecture. That's, obviously, that's totally within his right to do. That's why I have a public hearing.
On the modification document that I'm seeing, the language, the new proposed language says, no new residential structure, then it says, this restriction shall not be construed as prohibiting the building of a second floor on the existing one-story residence.
Right.
But it doesn't address demolition and reconstruction.
Yeah.
No,
that's
sure it
what I'm
does. On the
asking.
next page, it says that.
What page? Oh, you're not
The next
taking-
page, it says, on page 3, there shall be no expansion of the building ground area coverage or footprint of the said.
But we're-
The expansion of said building's ground area coverage is proposed, said building shall be
Right.
moved back 100
But-
feet.
But
Both of us read the same thing, Rob and I, that
restrictions will not be construed as prohibiting the building of a second floor on the existing one-story residence.
Then you have Mr. Foster's letters where he confirms that based upon the existing state of the law, the village code, the variance relief granted, which runs with the land, that that we are allowed to construct a new two-story residence. Because it only makes sense if the zoning board of appeals says, oh, you can put a second story on a house, historic issues aside, that gives you the right to tear everything down and build anew.
where do you, well,
That's
except
just a-
that it
that's
says
just a matter of law.
specifically
That's
that
just
you
a
can
matter of law.
restore, it's not historic.
It's not historic.
No.
No, I was
Legal
saying,
advice here?
No, I have no legal advice. I don't know anything about these facts, but doesn't common sense say if you're going to build a second floor on a structure that is
Probably
not
rebuild it.
structurally appropriate to support that weight,
You probably
you're going to
rebuild
have to
it.
make major changes?
Yeah, it
and,
does.
All right.
You know, you're all but effectively saying it's going to be a new residence, and then you get into the definition of what's a new residence.
then you
And in
have
this
the
case,
FEMA
we have
issue.
to have FEMA
Yeah.
FEMA compliance.
And you've got to comply with FEMA, even if you just added the second floor, probably.
Okay.
So,
But even though those issues aside, say for example that you're on a lot, on a farmland lot, and your house is at 20 feet where the required zoning setback is 80 feet, and you go into the zoning board of appeals and they give you a variance to build a second story on a one-story house, the existing house. If you went to the building department, gave them that variance, and gave them a set of brand-new plans, the zoning board of appeals has given the dimensional relief, they would give a building permit for a new house.
All right, let's hear from the.
okay, could you sit down for a minute? So we can
Yes.
have the objectant or the other lawyer, I don't know what he's going to say. Your name, sir?
Sure. Good evening. My name is Thomas Gibbons. I'm here on behalf of South Lane Properties, which is the owner of 104 Gin Lane, which sits immediately east of the applicant's
Okay.
property. Yes, I
not
think the
immediately east.
application before the ARB is premature because, as Mr. Bennett pointed out, there is a covenant imposed by the planning board in 1993, or before 1993. This was one 9.9 acre parcel. And the then owner, Browse, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, applied to subdivide it. And after some litigation and the zoning board and the planning board in Article 78, yes, Mr. Bennett is correct that a covenant was imposed. He didn't exactly read it as it's written. It specifically says, no new residential structure or sanitary disposal facility or expansion of existing residential buildings shall be constructed or otherwise located within 100 feet of the top of the dune. Period. That's it. No new residential structure means no new residential structure. Perhaps, as the village attorney says, common sense would lead you to believe X, Y, and Z, but I think really that's a matter for the planning board. It's their covenant. If common sense dictates that if you can add a second story, yes, what they're allowed to do is add a second story to the existing structure. If that's equal to knocking down the structure that currently exists, then let them go to the planning board and get that relief. I don't think you could say, nah, it's all the same. So you know what? That planning board covenant that's been in existence since 1993, we can just push that by the wayside because it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. So I would submit to this board that it hold open a decision on the applicant's application until such time as the issue of the planning board covenant is resolved.
May I respond?
How would you propose that be resolved?
Go before the planning board and seek relief from that covenant. They're the ones that imposed it. And again, it's a planning board covenant. So Mr. Bennett, who's been in front of the planning board, 8 trillion times, can go in front of the planning board and say, look, the applicant is permitted to build a second story on this structure. So it's the same thing to demolish and put a new one. But permitting a new structure to be built is in direct violation of this covenant. Was my client's property part of the subdivision? No, but the village still has an obligation to enforce a planning board covenant that specifically says no new residential structure. No new residential structure means no new residential structure, not no new residential structure, but this, that, and the other thing. Go in front of the planning board and seek relief from that covenant. That's what the applicant should be doing before coming to the ARB.
Counsel.
John?
Yeah, I'm not going to go before the planning board because there's no relief required here. The planning board covenant, which is construed in to the benefit of the applicant, not the planning board, has been specifically found to be by the building inspector, who in the first instance has the right to interpret these things. What we're asking, the relief, what we're proposing here is totally in conformance with the covenant. And the reason I talked about who can complain about a covenant, and who can ask somebody to enforce it, is somebody in the subdivision or somebody in the chain of title. Mr. Shumway, who's the principal, has no standing whatsoever to raise this.
Well, how
I
about
think Tom
those?
is saying that. I think Tom is, he just advised in this board that there is a different
There's-
interpretation of the covenant, and he
By
is,
whom? By him.
yeah.
There's no arm
How
of
about
the
our
village.
No, he's just advising it.
responsibility?
He's not trying to enforce it. Is
Our
that it, correct, Tom?
responsibility,
Yes, sir.
now that we've been made aware of it.
Well, yes, we have been made aware of it, but there's
I know,
nothing.
we have your interpretation, I can read, Mr. Bennett, and I saw this, and that was sort of brushed aside by you, but I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer.
Wait a minute. Wait a
No
minute.
new sanitary, I mean, come on, this is,
No, wait a minute. Before my client purchases property, we, in our complete and full due diligence, went to the village of Southampton and made
Where's
sure
that
that
written
we
down?
Went to the building.
the building code, yes.
But if I may, I don't think there's anything in the village code, and I can be corrected by the village attorney or Mr. Bennett, that says where a covenant is imposed by the planning board, the chief building inspector, without a public hearing, can be presented a letter to lift that covenant imposed
I'm
by the
not
planning
trying to
board.
lift the covenant.
Well, you're
And
trying to say that it doesn't
Tom is
exist.
saying, he's saying that Mr.
What-
Foster may not have had the jurisdiction to render that letter by interpreting the planning board covenant.
The purpose of this covenant is to say that if there's any expansion, it's very express, any expansion of the ground area coverage, we're not
right, well, let's-
but
proposing.
it does say
let-
within 100, I mean, there are, the paragraph, I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, but
All right,
there is
so-
a paragraph that needs to be interpreted
Correct. So
somehow, it's in
it's
plain
not going to
English.
happen tonight.
No, I don't expect it.
So my theory would be, or suggestion is, that we've got an administrative board confronted with these issues. How long do you guys want for briefs and memos? Put it in writing
For which board? For this board?
to this board, and the village attorney's office will make
Why
a,
is this board even
the
involved
village
in the
attorney's
covenant?
office will make a rendering whether or not we have that
Wait a
jurisdiction or
minute,
not.
hold on a second. The case law is extremely well set.
Well, let's have it.
Well, no, hold on a second. That a covenant, if there's a covenant that prohibits, for example.
John, I'm not going to make that decision without having case law and memos on it. That's the bottom line.
I need,
Whatever you guys like, or we can't agree upon it tonight, and then give us a memo, or give me,
can you give me another example of when the architectural
I
review
can't think of
board
when
has
this-
looked into a covenant that was imposed on a piece of property?
well, we just had an example in the planning board today where there's a Suffolk
planning board,
County
though.
covenant, and
Right.
the village attorney's office
That
has
wasn't a
said,
Suffolk County covenant, that was a planning board covenant. That was
Okay.
properly before the planning board.
all right, well, there you go.
Well, but I'm not, but this is not the same case.
Tom is
I'm
saying
before
that this
board.
should be in front of the planning board.
Well, it's your it's your decision.
That's what I'm
to make
saying, and I want a
determination as to
memo of
whether or not
law
he's private say
to
that.
base a decision on that I can counsel my client.
Whatever.
Whatever
Okay.
fits Mr. Bennett's schedule as far as submission of memos is fine by me.
Fine by
So
me.
what, so,
Unbelievable.
sorry. So,
It's going to be like a cat chasing its tail. You realize
No,
that?
I'm asking
If I
for
went
this
back to the
now.
zoning, if the planning board said go back to the zoning board of appeals, what do you think the zoning board of appeals could do
I don't know.
in this instance? They could do nothing other than approve the
I don't know,
two-story
John,
house.
but we want to see some law on it.
Unbelievable.
so we're
So we'll adjourn for
adjourned.
all purposes, and,
No standing to raise this covenant.
well,
Not in
then,
the chain of
give me
title.
give me the
Once-
memo that
Mr.
says he
Bennett,
doesn't.
once we know about it, then we're in the hot seat here legally.
This is
No,
considered
no,
lot
you're
3?
not.
This is considered lot 3?
Yes,
Yes.
it's considered lot 3.
Okay. Motion to adjourn for all purposes.
Over my objection.
Over Mr. Bennett's objection, 72 Gin Lane LLC for legal briefs.
You don't need to give a reason, just
Okay.
adjourn it. Tom, do we have your contact information, stationery or something in the file?
I will drop it off tomorrow if that's
Yeah,
acceptable.
where is your office located?
6 Oak Street, or around the
Oh.
corner.
That's a long walk. I hope
Very
it's
long
not a
walk.
big
So
burden.
I'll
Okay.
grab coffee at the cheese shop and drop off my contact
That'd be good.
information. And this is being adjourned to when, 7/8 or?
7/8, but in the meantime, you and John should give us a collective letter as to a schedule.
So it's-
Certainly. Thank you. Have a good evening.
so this is
We-
adjourned.
made a motion.
Oh, motion, we did? Did we
You
vote
made
on
a
it?
motion.
Motion,
So
Adjourn
moved.
for all
let's
purposes.
vote. Do you agree with the adjournment?
Yeah.
A
Aye,
second.
aye.
Aye.
Okay. Next, and finally, Scott Klansky, 57 Pond Lane, constructs two-story additions to existing dwelling.
Evening, Board.
This is gonna be tough.
Have the affidavit of mailing.
Oh, yeah. You do. State your names,
Alexander Khan, I'm the architect for the project.
and you, sir?
Michael Riley, building.
Okay.
I also have copies for the board.
What's this letter?
Posting a mail.
That's a letter from the current owner that my client, Scott Clancy, can be the contract vendee.
Say that again? Can you speak up?
Oh, it's a letter from the current owner that Scott Clancy can be the current, the contract
It's from
vendee.
Jeffrey Lewis.
He's a contract vendee.
My client is a contract vendee,
Agent letter.
Who is your client? Your client is not the owner?
correct.
Your
Not the
client
current.
What's the name of your
is,
client again?
Scott Clancy,
and the owner is Jeffrey Lewis, according to the stationery.
Michael Riley.
All right, are you passing, so do we get plans, small plans?
yeah, I just gave some small
Okay,
plans,
just checking.
one for each, yep.
So Mr. Lewis has given
Mr. Clancy.
Mr. Clancy the right to have Mr. Riley representing here tonight.
Well done.
Me. Me, I'm the architect.
Your name again, I didn't hear.
Alexander Khan.
Khan.
Okay, so then why are you,
He's
why is
contract.
Mr. Riley the contract vendee?
No, Scott Klansky, my client, is the contract vendee.
But you said something about Mr. Riley being the contract vendee, or you?
No.
Contractor.
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 I think
Contractor, the builder. The builder. He's gonna build the project.
He's the builder for the contract vendee.
Correct.
Yeah. You know, you really like to highlight your additions. Very challenging on this.
Sure. The entire second floor is gonna be new. And then we have a small one-story addition in this area where the garage is.
Can you
Tell us north, south, east, or west, and
It's going to be southeast.
Elevations.
Elevations?
Are they existing elevations? Just of the existing,
I do not, but I have
Photographs.
pictures.
not photographs, existing elevations in the same scale as the proposed elevation?
not.
Okay.
Makes it easier for
Makes it difficult.
So this
in
is
the
just like a
absence of
big
them.
guessing game. So we can't see the the actual renderings of what you're adding onto, is that correct?
This is a rendering of
what you want to do.
Yes,
Just the
But
new work.
where's what is?
Calling out the new work.
in the pictures is the existing house.
Yeah, but where the, I give up, I'm just tired of cranking. Go ahead, someone else can do it. I can't do much
Without
more.
making fun of this, it's just usually what we see on a renovation, particularly in the historic district, is an elevation of the existing house and an elevation of the proposed house. Or an elevation of the proposed house that bubbles out very specifically what's new to it, so that we can tell, this is a property that's not very visible from the street.
No, it's not visible at all from the street.
Right.
Correct. It's a flag lot, it's a very long flag lot.
Yeah.
You're not going to see this house from the street whatsoever.
I'll start first by stating that the house is not a contributing structure in the
Right.
historic district.
Right. It's in the historic
But it's
district.
in a
the
really
histor-
high
it's in
charged
the historic
historic
district.
district.
So you're adding on to a non-contributing structure.
That's correct.
Correct.
No, so there's a one-story building there now.
Correct, it's a one-story building. We're looking to add this second floor. This garage in the front. And we're looking to raise the first floor plate height 2 feet.
Garage in the front where?
It's the southeast
It's an
corner.
attached garage on the
Yes,
front?
attached garage,
Single
correct.
car.
And this, what is this material? It's not shingles? I can't read it.
Board and batten.
A board and batten that you're adding on a shingled house?
Right now, it's a stucco house. Yeah, the
So you're
existing house.
completely changing the facade?
Do we have
Yes.
pictures of
Yeah.
the
What,
existing house?
you know,
Sure.
okay,
I think there's some in the file. We have some.
Oh, you have some?
okay. Can you-
Yeah, I tried to give existing house pictures, pictures of details that we're looking to add, a rendering of our new proposed, and elevations.
Is there something about the original house that you want to keep, rather than just starting fresh and new, tearing down a non-contributing structure?
Are they, they're not, quote, tearing it
I
down?
know, I'm just
Okay.
asking,
Yeah, we're trying
because
to keep the existing border for the most part and just extend the existing walls up to give a larger ceiling height.
I only ask that because when you build from what exists, you're adding to whatever envelope and whatever form the current structure is, rather than starting from scratch where you have a vanilla envelope and you're able to really be creative in the construction.
Right.
And I think that's where Susan's going to have Susan has some issues with some of the design details. So I'm not going to take words out of your mouth.
Yeah, no, go ahead. You're doing a good job.
But because you're limited to your current footprint and your current style, and rather than starting over from new.
Yeah, you
where-
might want to just hang with the shingles.
Well, it's not shingled,
It's
Right,
stucco.
oh, right, it's stucco.
And
but-
Like,
but
there's
you're
nothing
thinking-
redeeming about
yeah,
what
it's
currently
nothing,
exists.
it's not
I
in good
agree, there's
condition.
nothing redeeming about
We're
that.
trying to make it look more.
Yeah, we're trying to match more of the context of the village,
Okay.
which is all shingle houses.
You want to look at the pink house?
I know the house.
Oh, for some reason I've lost it. in here. What's this?
That's a
What's
rendering.
what? That's the rendering of the house. that we'd like to
Proposed new
do.
house.
That's why you're going to have a.
What's the roof?
Wood
Roof
shingles.
is wood shingles.
Are we having a color issue here?
This is a little bit better color.
It's
What
not
was
gonna
that?
be pink shingles,
No, it's gonna be white shingles,
natural,
White.
cedar.
I saw that
white
in
board
the
and
paper.
batten, white
Hand that
trim.
in.
Yes.
Right over here.
Here,
Sorry, my printer's not.
Well, I saw that. That's why
No, it's gonna be white cedar.
I knew you were going to go
I
crazy.
appreciate
And
your
it's wood
concern.
cedar shingles on the
White
roof?
cedar,
Yeah.
white trim,
Okay,
white.
we're moving in the right direction.
Yes, it's not
Okay.
pink. We're gonna have regular, natural wood cedar roofing. We're gonna
Dip
have-
siding,
We're gonna
board and
have
battens
navy,
on the gables, the upper gables only.
we're gonna have navy shutters, navy front door, navy garage door,
Sorry, Navy
Navy.
navy front doors,
and garage door?
garage door.
We had this, I hated the black door, but I saw one and I decided
That's
it
it.
wasn't the worst thing I ever saw.
Do you have some,
See the pictures?
Here, he needs this.
do you have a picture of what we'd like to do with the garage
Sure.
door?
We'd like
Zoom
any
down on
picture
that.
you can show us, because
So that-
Yeah, no, I have pictures of all kinds of details. that we-
fabulous.
Do you want me to hand them in or lay them
Oh,
on the
you
table?
can, we have some of them anyway.
Oh, yeah, just,
Yeah, no, I
Put 'em
tried to
down
give
so
as
the
much
rest of-
information
so
up
the-
front for you
We're gonna
guys.
capture it
pick
on
it up.
video, that's the most important
Absolutely.
thing.
okay. So could I just ask you a simple question? Do you have the plan, are the plans, are they accurate? Are those the plans that you, sir, would be
Yes.
building?
That's the house.
These are the plans.
Because you've been sitting here all night, you must understand that that's a
There are
question
no
I have to
drafting
ask.
errors on
I'm
the
so
plans.
sorry.
This seems like an
Okay,
easy
well, I'm
one
glad
for
you came
guys.
so we could ask you.
Yes.
Do you have a roof plan?
We'll have a roof plan.
Well, here,
I don't understand how we get files for us to review that don't have roof plans. I don't get it. Do I need to talk to Chris about this?
I add roof plans to my floor plans,
Okay.
so I have some roof
To the floor
structure.
plans, okay.
Yes. So if you look at the second floor, you
There's
see
not
the
a
dash.
separate roof plan, I see.
Yeah,
So
I
there's
do
dotted-
combined.
It's overlaid.
The dotted lines are an overlay. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Couple other quick questions. The corbels or brackets, is that, those aren't structural?
No.
No, decorative.
Okay. It's odd to me that they go up and down, that they jog up and down the way they do. Usually, typically, a bracket like that is meant to at least imply structure, and it's odd that the structure wouldn't go up and down the way they do, right? Because you get the two outer ones on each of the mini gables.
Do you want us to take
Lower.
away the higher ones in the front?
Well, let me
Because
just,
it wraps around the side.
Yeah, these two lower ones correspond with the soffit height. The smaller ones that step up are a raised extended gable.
yeah. So that's wrapping. Well, let me go through the things that caught my eye.
Would
That
you-
was one thing that caught my eye.
Would you like me to lower the line of the board and batten so that those
Well,
corbels come in
those
line?
sort of, they're like, when
Why?
you buy a shirt that's striped and the things don't match up, the stripes, so when the board and batten comes down, then these things aren't really on the seam, would you say?
That's part of it. It's also that, I need to remember, all of this is going to be white, right?
Yes.
Yes.
As in the rendering. So a lot of this kind of goes away and just creates shadows as opposed to.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And also is the depth here.
Colors.
The depth
Yes.
on the lower ones that seem larger, it's
Yeah.
because the soffit is larger at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, we got
And
the
I always have to
corbels.
remember that elevations can be very deceptive.
Yeah.
So right now, this elevation comes across as busy.
Yep.
The board and batten and.
vent.
What's that?
A huge vent.
Vent up on the top, which is, they've got a detail.
Lot of triangles.
Copy. And the shingles. So
Brackets.
all in white, that may go away more.
But
I
is-
think those
yeah.
brackets, as they run along the side, is a detail that maybe aren't necessary, but it's not
How
for me
would
to
they
say.
join the board and batten and the shingle then?
It's all white.
It's
Nothing to
joined
see.
You
at,
wouldn't see it?
it breaks right at the gable height, so it actually, the gable extends over a little bit, and that's.
And the shingles run up into it.
Oh, oh.
Shingles
Yes.
run up underneath it, and that's
There's
the
a-
cause for that's where the smaller,
There's a
corbels.
6-inch
6-inch.
offset.
yeah.
Got it, okay. On the east side of the north elevation, I'm looking at my notes from when I read the file, so I need to find this now. That's the north elevation is,
Good question.
is that front?
Yes.
No,
East is front.
east is front, so north is right, is the right elevation. I'm saying,
Okay, rear, left.
I mean, I'll have to make use of
Right is
that.
on the
What
front.
is reeded glass? Or
It's like corrugated.
corrugated?
Where's that?
Okay, it's on the front door. The chimney, is that to code? Looks a little short.
Short, yeah, it should be 2 feet above any
10
roof
feet away.
within
Yeah.
10 feet away.
2 feet above.
And what's the
okay.
material? Is that a white brick chimney, or what are you doing there?
We're gonna do the
Danish.
Danish blend.
Danish blend,
Full
right,
masonry chimney?
ubiquitous.
Is it
Okay,
full
that's,
masonry chimney?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
And we're gonna do a bluestone
Bluestone.
cap.
okay. And the shingle exposure says, I think, 5.5 inches.
5.5.
But on the rendering, it looks more like
I just,
10 or 11.
yeah, my program's not
Depends
the
on which
best
which
with-
brand we use. Some of them come in different lengths. If we can get an 18, we go to a 5.5. If we want to get a 16,
And
we
the
go to a 5.
shingle pattern is also showing a little bit of variation up and down. That's just part
Oh,
of?
is
Yeah,
that
that's
the-
just
We're looking
it's
for-
my
just a
AutoCAD
standard
hatch.
Shingle? Not the little bit?
No, standard single shingle.
Yeah,
Okay,
we're
that's
gonna-
what I see.
The shingle's
you're-
more
that's
gonna
the
be like
print.
this.
Okay.
It's more
that's-
like this right here.
So a 5.5-inch
yeah.
exposure
Yeah.
is what you're looking for?
Yes.
I
And
will
how-
just note that I have an issue on this. I've seen some recent construction where what was supposed to be 5.5 to 8-inch exposures have turned out to be 4.5 or even 4-inch exposure. And I know it sounds like
No.
a small thing, but it makes
We're
a big
looking,
difference
we're looking for
No,
more.
in a number of
no.
ways.
We're looking for more.
Okay, all right.
And the roof is shingle too?
Wood shingles.
Yep.
What's on the house shingles? Wood
They're
shingles?
dipped, white dipped.
Yeah, but they're
Cedar.
wood.
Cedar.
Yep.
Okay, just checking. Okay. I do think that this is the rear, but where you have the gable and the board and batten and the vent,
Mhm.
is there any way to simplify that?
We can take the vent out if you don't like it.
Well, don't you need the vent, though?
No,
No.
it's decorative.
You can't.
What do you
have-
think, Rob?
We'll take
Take
it out
the
if you
vent
don't
out?
like
The
it.
vent,
I don't
it's just
know.
meant to be decorative and look
Yeah.
like a dovecote, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you should take that out.
I don't mind it, but
Okay,
If
never
others-
mind. I don't know. I find that top part,
If you want the
not
vent out, we'll
a
take it out.
great fan of board and batten, and then,
I tried
I
to
know it's all
minimize
white
it.
though, so
Oh,
maybe it doesn't
are
matter.
you looking at the big triangular vent or the dovecote on the top of the tall gable?
No, I
Which
think
is-
she's talking about,
I'm looking at both.
this is
Okay, you go,
this
boy.
is the birdhouse.
Not a
So,
vent.
this,
The one in the front is not a vent. It's supposed to look like a.
Oh, is that what you?
Yes.
Little
That's what it's
birdhouse.
gonna actually
Is
look
that what
like.
it is?
that's
Yes.
okay.
That's cute. No,
Yeah.
that's
I think
cute. That
that's
makes
cute.
sense.
Yeah, no, I wanted
Don't
to
be
have a
sorry.
picture of that.
Those things
No,
make a
those are
lot of
actually-
noise and a mess.
No, they're
Yeah,
painted.
but yeah,
They're not
the shingles are
actual,
going to be
Those
ridiculous.
swallows.
Are the
They're not
louvered
actual
vents-
holes.
Fake?
Are the louvered vents
Fake.
functional, though?
no,
They were purely decorative.
decorative.
Yeah.
This thing
decorative.
is decorative?
The vent.
No,
The
both of them.
vent, not
This-
that.
The vent is decorative.
Vent is
You
decorative.
can't have an operating gable vent anymore
Okay.
with the HERS rating.
I would get rid of it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Oh,
We'll
don't
just
send
do
them
the
to my
continuous
place.
ridge vent.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because your attic gets freezing cold.
Any kind of vents nowadays are just decorative.
Yeah.
What? I had to
Yeah.
make it colder because of the ice
Oh yeah.
damming.
You were looking to
Be
break up
surprised.
that tall.
Of course, it has.
Yeah, it was
You'll
just- it was
spray
too
foam in
much.
the,
It was
roof
just too
vent.
much board and batten. I wanted to break it up with something.
You can't have any.
I would have put
Okay.
the
Too much
birdhouse,
fresh
but
air.
My house is
my
limited.
client didn't want
That
to
is a problem.
have too many birdhouse competing with each other.
So we have the birdhouse, we have the vent on the backside. This is the front, the thing, the birds.
Birds are in front.
Yeah, birds on the front.
Okay, so does anyone,
I guess just for clarification, it's on the front elevation, on the left side of the front elevation. The board and batten there is the side of the garage that projects out?
yeah,
Yes, that's
Okay.
the garage,
Yeah,
correct.
That's on the wall.
Yep. And the door is set back behind that on the form to the rear?
Correct. That's going into the living room
Yep.
or,
Where the
Goes down
where the
the
chimney is? yeah.
Family.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
oh,
no, that's the
Goes to the-
the family.
Yeah.
okay, I just,
That's this door.
so what do we think here?
It's about 22 feet back, that door.
Then the pink stucco, you mean?
I'm sorry, I just have one final clarification, if you would. Over the front door,
Yep.
you've got posts there, but it looks like sort of a flat roof. Or it's a trellis?
It's a trellis,
Trellis.
Got it.
correct.
And this shows the vertical members of the trellis hitting the door or vice versa. Is that set back far enough for the door? How does it work?
It's better to see in the rendering, the 3D.
Wait a minute,
They're not,
Where is the rendering?
it's on page A4.
no, the
No,
color
the-
rendering.
Is there a
Oh, the
in?
color
Where
rendering.
did that go?
Yeah.
No, those are pictures. Oh, this one, thanks.
Yes,
The pink roof one?
Okay.
Let's
no
see
pink
that.
roofs,
So.
That's fabulous.
Okay.
natural wood.
So there looks like sort of three horizontal members, but it's set far enough back and maybe up higher in the rendering than it is in the elevation. Does a door go underneath those?
Yes,
members?
yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Do you
Could
see
I
what I'm
see that?
seeing in the elevation where it looks like the top of the door is at the same level as the horizontal members?
Yeah.
Okay,
No.
so is this actually taller than it's showing in the elevation?
Yeah, they're taller, so the door will be under it completely.
Can you put that down there so that, ugh,
Okay.
hold on,
I got it.
so we could have it, oh, we got another one? What do you
Yep.
know?
All right.
All
I
right,
don't have any
I,
more questions.
Curtis?
This requires a written decision, right? Because it's in the historic district.
It is in historic
Um,
district.
Could I ask you to just make that correction on the height of the vertical members? Just resubmit those pages,
Do
maybe?
you want me to raise the trellis?
Yeah.
Yeah, that shows the
Sure.
actual height of the trellis over the door,
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind, so that we can sign plans that are actually what's going to be built.
You can actually bring them in, it's gonna be written decision, there'll be some time.
Yeah, you
before it's
can.
written decision.
A lifetime.
You
No,
can bring in another set of drawings to flip that if you wish.
Okay.
Just ask them to substitute that page.
Elevation. Do you want me to put an actual height?
You don't have to put an actual height.
Just move it.
Just so it shows. Actually, you know what, if you would call out the height, just to
Sure.
make it clear, that would be
Absolutely.
good.
Do you want me to call out the bottom of the trellis or the top of the trellis?
Yeah.
I would do call out the height
I'll
of
do
the
the
top of the
bottom.
trellis.
Okay, I was gonna say the bottom because we'll show that it's over the 8 feet.
All right. Do we have a motion to,
So I'm going to make a motion that we close for written decision, the application of Scott Clancy at 57 Pond Lane.
second?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
I know it was a long wait, but look what
Thank you
happened.
for waiting and explaining.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have anything else? We have to mention that Halsey Street House, Cape Fernand. More to be said for demo? Okay. Is there anything else you want to bring up, Bo? Do I have a motion to close the meeting of the Board of Architectural Review and Historic Preservation of June 24th, 2019?
I make a motion that we
So
close this meeting of the Board of Architectural Review and Historic Preservation.
Second.
Good night.
Thank you, board.
Aye.
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 Thank you.